there are a lot of things in this world that make no sense. I mean, where does that matching sock disappear to in the dryer? It's literally an enclosed space. Where did it go? And why do scammers make the grift so obvious? Like, who does that kind of stuff actually work on? And why do people destroy themselves in service of art? So much work for so little reward when you could just do anything else. Of course, everything has an explanation. There's no such thing as we don't know, only we don't know yet. I mean, socks get lost in the dryer because they're small enough to fit through the natural gaps in the drum and the shell. It's not a perfectly enclosed system. And scam emails are obviously fake because, whether intentional or not, it was noticed that less false positives occurred when the scam seemed ridiculous. That is, only the people who would fall for something obvious responded, making the fakeness an active filtering system for gullibility. And people work so hard at creating art because it's art? Understanding why people make art is more complicated because it's uniquely human, a system not of drum and shell that we design, but of the body and mind which did so. There are animals which exhibit dances and color, chimpanzees and elephants that paint, but for the former case only in service of another goal, such as attempting to court a mate, and in the latter because the behavior was reinforced from the outside. Humans are the only ones who will put themselves actively into harm's way in order to make something that many would even consider a total waste of time. The answer isn't woven into the fabric of humanity, but into the fabric of every bit of humanity, a tangled mess within each and every individual, tying their childlike whimsies into their adult anxieties and everything in between. So this video isn't going to have an answer as to why people create things, but it is going to be the best attempt possible at understanding exactly why creation is so terrible, its naturally depressing trend, and why we can't help but do it anyway despite all that. It's born from the work of some very creative people and the words of one very interesting man. This is a look at Look Back. It centers on two artists. Fujino, whose rough but punchy and comedic style in the school's 4-panel earns her the praise of her classmates. Confident and adored, Fujino's popularity and worth is built on the back of this arrangement. That is, until she gives up a single one of the strips to Kyomoto, a shut-in whose polished representations of real life steal away all of that praise, leaving Fujino desperate to catch up, throwing herself into producing better art. And in just this premise, we see one of the movie's main points, a sort of paradox of creativity if we want to put a fancy title to it. Kyomoto puts a ton of effort into producing the minimal amount of work that she does. Her room and hallway alike are littered with sketchbooks full of this work. Go deeper into her room and you'll see literally nothing but the practice of art. She developed this skill from being left home alone with nothing else to do, and so she got good at something she could do in isolation. That is, in a way, something for its own sake then. There is no exterior reason why she does it because there is no one to share it with. Meanwhile, Fujino clearly delighted in something outside of the craft itself, soaking up all of that praise. At the same time, she worked a lot less on it, putting the strips together in a few minutes at the end of the night. Although, to a child in a small world, that very well may have been a lot of work. I mean, compare what you thought was a lot of homework in 4th grade to in 11th grade. It's going to be a bit different, even though your perception of it at the time felt the same. But whatever the case, that's only until Fujino sees Kyomoto's work compared to her own, and spends an entire year tanking her family and social lives alike in order to practice non-stop. Quite literally, she's placed into the background of life, worried about and called weird by all of her friends. So we have someone who works very hard to create great works, but isn't around to get the praise for them exactly because she's busy creating them, and someone who did get that praise exactly because she was able to be around instead, but in order to reclaim it has to become the kind of absent person who then can't receive it anyway. That's the paradox. The harder one works to try and make works worthy of reward, the less of it they can actually get. And while I like to think of art for art's sake as the better way, I think it would be cruel to say that people shouldn't be rewarded for their work, and so we do have to consider the result as part of this equation. It's summed up best in how Fujino's room evolves. It goes from being chock full of pre-existing entertainment, shelves full of manga, to all being cleared out to make room for practice materials and sketchbooks instead. She can either be reading manga or creating it, but each minute spent doing one is another less doing the other. She can't both enjoy and create art at the same time. Of course, Fujino has some feelings on this, believing that Kyomoto both has a better situation to be good at drawing, home all day instead of at school, and also that her work is strictly better for its technical polish. It's natural to think that way, especially for a child whose world is, as we said, very small. She simply doesn't know yet. However, there is a lot more complexity to this issue than just one is better even if it's harder, which is revealed to us and Fujino when she and Kyomoto actually meet. She's tasked with bringing the shut in her diploma when they graduate from 6th grade, and while there accidentally slips a snarky manga strip under Kyomoto's door. Fujino runs away, thinking this would be embarrassing at best, but when Kyomoto runs out after her, it turns out to be anything but. The girl who drove her to feel worthless at art is her biggest fan. She can list specific ones and when they came out, insanely impressed by both the sheer volume, story, and comedy of the works. As a background artist, Kyomoto can render a scene perfectly, but she can't actually place a story of her own into it, rather just making space for one. Think about it. When you see this after-school scene without the somber music, you could place anything into it based on your own experience. Is it the sad goodbye at graduation, or is it the happy bursting out into the world after a long day of classes? Is it the teacher about to retire looking back on their own work, maybe even? Of course, the shading and framing communicate something, but it's largely open to what you decide, a contrast to Fujino's art, which expressly tells you the story. And so, despite what Fujino once believed, Kyomoto actually finds herself lacking compared to Fujino's works. This is where the paradox of creativity continues, because the reason for this is an extension of what we covered already. Fujino was living life and Kyomoto wasn't. The latter isn't able to put much story to these works because she doesn't have one of her own. She hasn't been out there getting the experiences which inform one of what to write about and how. She hasn't joked with friends about the cheesiest of romances and meteors hitting the earth to have such an idea of smashing them together. The merit of Fujino's work comes exactly from the fact that she has time away from the craft to gain inspiration for what to represent with it, a mind full of wacky and wild things created in a mixture of vivid experiences more than just observing a scene. And we see this pretty directly later on when the two work together to make one-shots, with each one being created from a specific experience that they share. That is, without being out and living life, they would have never made these stories that gained them success. Each minute spent making manga is another less getting inspired by things to make it. Each side demands but then inhibits the other, 2 points on the same spectrum desperately seeking to become the other one, both validating and invalidating their positions. It's desirable but also undesirable? What is a background if it never has any characters? And what are the characters if they're just floating in space? This is one of the harshest aspects of creativity. You'll always need more of what you don't have, always be jealous of other methods that present those things. And Look Back also expresses why, even if it feels like you've struck all those balances and found success, there is still an issue. That success is always extremely fickle. Fujino was the star of her class, literally having all of the attention at once when that paper was passed out. But the second there's something better placed next to it, she's, and I quote directly, mid. It's especially hurtful in this case, where she was actually asked if she was okay with giving up one of her slots and confidently believed it would only make her look better.
Can a scaredy cat who doesn't even come to school handle drawing manga on a deadline?
But if the attention can go to you that easily, then, well, of course it can leave you just as easily. And so it makes sense that she'll ditch all her stuff and fade into the background of life, all of her friends calling her weird, because the best thing, the one she feels drawn to, needs to be a continuous action to have any guarantee that it will stay. We see this when she later becomes a successful mangaka, hitting the top spot with a recurring series time and time again, happy music playing over a rising graph, but also each time afterwards falling just the same. And what we see after the happy summary of success is her alone and working. No celebration, just continuation, because when you stop to celebrate, it's gone, And now it's not even really celebration because, well, this is just your job, and after each success, you're reminded of how fickle your livelihood is. In under an hour, Look Back expresses exactly why creation makes no sense. Fujino herself even says,
You know, if I'm being super honest, I don't even like drawing manga. I'd be way happier reading manga. I shouldn't draw it.
And there is a moment when she quits to do this. After spending a whole year trying to catch Kyomoto, she sees their work next to each other, and after a quiet moment comparing them, simply says, I quit, and goes back to having fun and being social on the spot. It's like a dam burst and a kid desperately wishing to live life finally could again. I mean, you think there'd be at least one night of sadness after this, but we don't see anything of the sort. I think it's because this moment of relief is one almost any creative knows deep down, when moving forward seems joyfully impossible. Because that's why she gives up. It just logically makes no sense to keep trying. She spent an entire year tanking every other aspect of her life and losing every second of time, and while she does improve, next to Kyomoto it seems like there's been no change at all. That improvement is impossible. And even more, as she jealously believed, Kyomoto was in a better situation for art anyway, able to stay home all day and draw. So even if she could improve, Kyomoto could always improve more in the same time, defeating the purpose. And throwing away all the materials is a confirmation of this, literally removing the supplies which make the act possible to begin with. She can still doodle on a piece of paper, but she can't make a polished work worth submitting without the right materials and supplies. It's the act of desire to give up because this craft is so awful and unrewarding most times, but needing a reason because you're drawn to it. And so making it simply impossible is the reason that works. Almost every creative quit in history is probably some variation of that impossibility, and then the relief that follows. But I think that only follows if one distracts themselves. The thing about life is that, well, it's complicated. A lot of different things are true at once. You can be happy to be rid of all the work, but still feel like a failure for giving it up. So Fujino throwing out all of the means to create isn't just preventing more of it, but also preventing more thoughts of it. If it was right there next to her on a quiet night at home, she might look over at it and think, well, why not, getting drawn right back in? So she gets rid of it to prevent all of that, turning the thoughts not just to, well, I don't have my stuff so I can't, but actually removing the thought entirely while she watches movies or goes out for ice cream with friends instead. She doesn't have anything sad to look at and doesn't have time to think of anything sad either. It's a distraction from the feeling deep inside of her, the soft smile which comes out when she finally draws again, reasoned away by,
Why am I wasting my time?
That's exactly why there's so much action behind giving up. Because when she acts naturally, she draws. And drawing, well, it makes life less fun. And so when Kyomoto gives her praise, specifically even saying that,
And then from 5th grade on, everything you did was just perfect, you know?
she's going to come back because she never actually came to terms with leaving, but simply ignored it. But even more, specifically that period of time, after 5th grade, that was the exact time where she was giving it her all to improve. So the person she was using as an example of why she could never get better has now expressly stated that she was improving in the exact period she was trying to. That is, that somewhere, deep down inside of her, there is that potential to be the better, the perfect, pure artist that made her start in the first place. And with this recognized, it's no longer impossible. There's no excuse to give up. So she naturally must keep going, angrily skipping home in joy. I think this is my favorite part of the whole movie, that mixture of such happy physical motion, but with an expression full of hate and disdain. It sums up creativity perfectly. It's the sheer joy of knowing that yes, it is possible for you to be everything you wish that feels fulfilling deep down, and the anger of also knowing that it will be the hardest task of your entire life. The life will pass you by while you try to make it what you wish, and so long as the possibility is there, you always have to try. So Fujino skips home, inspired and enraged by the most terrible thing to ever make her happy. There is a note of hope in all of this though. Fujino and Kyomoto are a tragic pair and always desiring something of the other's skill, but at the same time this provides a logical option. Why not work together? Instead of putting the panels side by side to be compared against each other, make them one, the story and the characters of one outgoing artist and the backgrounds of a shut-in savant. you get the perfect mixture of both set of skills. You reduce the amount of time that you have to both work and improve since you don't need to master every skill, and so then you both have time to still experience, which inspires the creation to begin with, and then you can actually do it. We see this in all their little glimpses of fun together while working a summer away. Sure, they're drawing a lot of the time, but it's working with breaks and snacks, with laughs and naps. It feels like, for the first time, the possibility of a perfect situation of creation, where the act and the reward are in the same exact room and the sky is the limit. There's no responsibility, there's no expectation, there's just creation. And this does pay off for them as they go big in the one-shot competition, win prize money and attention, and continue publishing successful works at such a young age, to the point that they're offered a full-time offer for their own series upon graduation. An offer that Fujino accepts and Kyomoto declines. An offer that brings success, but in the same breath inherently spells the end of that perfect situation for creation which could never last. We see this as they browse the library, one moving forward to the next thing she can grab, and another standing in place admiring the same book. There's a case for how each of them views the situation, which is of course coded by their past experiences. Kyomoto declines because she wants to go to art school rather than jumping right into her professional career. Sure, it's a great chance, but is she really ready for it yet? There's a lot of ways she can improve, and that's kind of what it's always been about. And maybe that even makes her next chances greater. What if you're not good enough and this one falls apart exactly because you didn't take the time to go and learn and practice and become more? She's fine giving up this chance because art was never about gaining something to her, but it was about the act itself, sitting alone in that house. In a way, she's the more pure desire of art, to do it for its own sake and attempt to bring the craft to its greatest heights, whether it benefits one or not. Meanwhile, Fujino accepts the offer because she knows how fleeting success can be. Remember that one time, that one moment where she gave up an inch of opportunity and her life fell back a mile? There's no way that after that she'll give up the chance to grasp her success. Sure, she could go off and improve, but what if they never got attention again? And instead of being able to work on art all day, she was stuck doing it after work just as she was after school. Wouldn't it be better to do it professionally, where she can both work on art and live to inspire that art? Or at least in theory. We know the schedule is worse than that. But the only certainty on this roller coaster of a passion is that she's doing something correct right now, and so if she keeps doing it, then she can keep focusing on art. This feels like the more realistic desire of art, where one has to balance commerce and skill rather than sticking to an ideal which may rob them of it entirely. And they're both right, which means there is no right way. There's only some mixture of conditions and situations which we cannot foresee, but which guarantee no perfect situation will ever exist. Kyomoto is on the path of a perfect artist, but that extra time makes her reach less than perfect. And Fujino probably has the greatest reach, but is now tied to a desk on a harsh schedule, eating while she works and occasionally moving 10 feet behind her to go to the bathroom, and that's her entire day. She used to make one-shots based on crazy experiences, and now she makes a recurring story, one which is evolving, of course, and important to many, but slowly, from more minimal free time and experience than ever before. And that's the point. She can grow and change, yes, but only ever in these confines. Only ever as the Shark Kick author on the Shark Kick schedule. This is the trap of her success. It removes the very thing which allowed her art to have such an intense feel to it in the first place and leads her down a road of repetition. The perfect artist inside of her is more impossible than ever, and that's made final in Kyomoto's death. In the wrong place, at the wrong time, she falls victim to a crazed attacker who believed his art was being stolen by the students at her school. Brutally, Kyomoto is dead. Fujino is devastated by this loss, even putting her manga on hiatus in a complete break from everything she knows to be true. After the funeral, she goes to Kyomoto's house to grieve, and while there finds the 4-panel which originally convinced Kyomoto to come out in the first place. Ripping it up, only the words "don't come out" slip under the door and seemingly back in time instead, convincing Kyomoto to never come out. This creates a new timeline where she goes to school, survives the attack because of an athletic Fujino, and inspired by the offer to join her in a new foray into manga, she goes back home and draws on an empty slip herself. The comic she draws about is being saved, which slips back through the door to the original timeline Fujino, who finds it and opens the door to see that that there is nothing on the other side. The manga was drawn clearly in Fujino's style, and this is a timeline where they never meet until the very end, and so there's no way Kyomoto could mimic that. And I think we see that confirmed in the end when the 4-panel she tapes up is blank. Kyomoto never drew anything on it. She was just imagining a world where everything could have been better, where she could have been better. It's not really a secret that you can take the start of one name, Fuji, and the end of the other, Moto, and put them together to get Fujimoto, the author's name. What we witness is two characters, but who form the experience of one author in the end. And that says a lot when one of the characters dies, when the one who was all about the pure route of artistic pursuit is buried under the ground. Kyomoto split off and grew more distant, eventually being removed entirely because finding success necessitates a removal of the perfect ideal, of art just for art's sake. On those tough schedules with expectations from fans and publishers always working to find the next spike just to survive, it becomes clear that one can never become the perfect artist. All they can ever be is an artist. Her despair at Kyomoto's death is the opposite of her inspiration early on. The latter, in childhood and lacking success with nothing to lose, where possibility was still wide open, it made sense that maybe one day she could be that pure artist. She could rush forward with this in mind no matter the costs, because the end results could always be worth it, because they were possibility idealized. But the despair happens when she's deep into her own returning series and eating alone at desk, because now it's obvious how impossible it is years later. You know that it probably can never be worth all the late nights and headaches and stress and doubt right when it becomes regular, performing art like a human breathes. It's your life and it can never be what you thought so far ago. And so, was it ever right to do this? Should you have waited? What would have happened if you did? Could different decisions have made it what you wished? Success seals her into doubt by chopping off the hope of everything for the guarantee of one thing. And I think we really see this when Fujino stands outside of Kyomoto's room and says,
Drawing is a waste of time. It doesn't save anyone.
added to that imagined future where she trains herself physically and directly saves someone. That is, saves herself too. She gets to become someone different with the free time to just go out for a run, with the physical skills to win against even someone with a goddamn pickaxe, with the confidence to not even bat an eyelash as she put in an ambulance with a broken leg. Compared to the mangaka sitting 2 inches behind a tablet with a rice ball desperately shoved in her mouth, this is someone that seems much more vivid and put together and confident, and who in the end still says she's getting into manga anyway alongside that pure artist side. It's a person who became complete before they became an artist. This is pretty directly Fujino thinking of all the ways where less success, more time with possibility, could have made her life so much better. And also a time where, even if that mangaka stuff doesn't work out, then she's still confident and fit and broadly skilled, rather than nervous and out of shape with only art on her resume locking her into that one thing. It's still a time where she never convinced that side of her that loves art so much for its own sake to come out of the room. A world where that self actually did turn into a pile of bones instead. One where she can be happy because she was able to give it up and distract herself all those years ago, and now she's so far deep into that distraction, so satisfied by it that she would never know what's being missed. It's an ignorance I think anyone focused so much on creative things envies. Or maybe that's just me. Surrounded by so many people braver than myself for so long now, envy has always been my worst trait. And I can share a really specific thing I envied with you too. College graduation. Mine was May 2020, which means, well, I never actually had it. There was no goodbye, no active turning of the page with any tears or any amount of emotion behind it, just a spring break that devolved into hell, leaving us grads with all the time in the world and nothing to do with it. My guaranteed job post-graduation, the thing that was supposed to secure my livelihood, made the wise decision that it wasn't the right time to bring more people into the same location, and, well, I wasn't exactly looking to rush right into those spaces myself either. But after years of school that I had to pay for, I wasn't exactly given to idle time. Despite this profession that seems so out of the norm, I'm actually a pretty proper product of the system. I only feel right when half my day, at least, is work. So I just made making my job. I'd been creating things before that point, but the world slowly dying provided me the perfect excuse to throw myself into it desperately instead of just here and there. For once, I wasn't creating and dealing with work or school or hell, even a social life. I was just creating. I was making no money, I had no fans, it was just me and myself, and all of that together opened up those possible futures where one day maybe I actually could perfect this craft, become some ideal self within, loved and admired, and so much more. The terrible state of the world gave me the best possible state for creation, and so I witnessed possibility and never stopped. From reviews and skits to analysis, I've refined what I was all about by ripping the most crucial parts of every form and stitching them together into one package, ever so slowly turning the subject from myself to stories and then back to myself. To be honest, I never really considered why I was doing it, why I'd shifted to such serious and personal things. Was it attention or purity of the craft, knowledge as power, or maybe even to help others? And no matter what I say now, I don't know what the source was. I can only guess. The physical origins of the channel was that I was a lonely child of divorced parents and awkward sibling. I wanted attention, compliment, and love. So I played games I hated with a friend, and we recorded it, mixing dreams of attention from vlogs with dreams of love, laying on his bed in satisfaction as he rambled on about things I would never care for. And once he hated me, the channel was mine, and it was really just all about how I loved Yu-Gi-Oh! And once the game changed and the pandemic started, the channel was just that I didn't want to think about myself in the world which was about to shape my adult life. I wanted distraction from the fact that love was never found and attention never gained. And so I worked 9 to 5, or a little bit more, on silly little videos instead, trying to understand Kogami and Spike rather than myself, stirring my emotions within the possibilities of a story instead of the ones dying all around me. There were glimpses of success in this pursuit. I can tell you how amazing it felt to wake up and find a boost of 171 subscribers in one day from that Black Lagoon video 4.5 years ago now. When I spoke about the series endlessly for the next 2 weeks, it was with the hope that one of those possibilities was transforming itself into that success, that the kid inspired by emo boys making vlogs in their bedrooms could finally gain that status too. But each spike has its fall. That was 5 months after my graduation, and I knew that, for some reason, every company looked down on 6 months without work in your particular field. I don't know how true that really is, but I knew it was said, and I knew that that stressed me out. I mean, I had 8,000 subscribers, and I made maybe $50 a month, while all the people who I graduated with better grades than were getting to their first real project that would secure them great jobs in the future. Great jobs which meant houses and food and warmth, which meant the hope of attention, of love, and all the things that an understanding of Shinya Kogami would never give me. Maybe I would make it, maybe even further than them, but I had no idea what numbers I needed to survive, and I had no idea how much time each video should take, and I had no idea how long each spike would last and where it would fall afterwards. I had no idea what I was doing at all. I'd never even really watched video essays before making them myself, except for Vsauce, and he could get like 10 million views with a whiteboard in a month of reading. To think I could ever get close to there was impossible. 8,000 means a lot against 171, but nothing against 10 million. The zero had only ever risen to zero. But right within possibility was a little company of 5 people down the road from me making machines for a niche industry, willing to take a chance on an unemployed and fresh engineer as their lead for $50,000 a year. And so I quit. You can go back and look at the exact day of October 30th, 2020. Unlike Fujino, it was in the middle of the pandemic, so I didn't have much fun to distract myself with. I was making money, but with nothing to spend it on, watching number go up and happiness go down. I remember talking with a friend. It was in his stupid drop-tiled basement playing VR, and he said something like, well, things were going well with the channel, right, just to make talk, and I responded, it's never going to happen, so I don't want to talk about it, and walked away for 10 minutes. I was really floating during that time, not even telling people I got a job until the night before I had to be there, because that job didn't mean financial security. It meant financial security at the cost of everything I wanted to be. There was someone sat behind that desk drawing out an interface between sensors and the motors they needed to activate, but that someone wasn't me. Neither was the person sitting with eyes glazed at a TV tuned to simply whatever was on, or even an episode of MASH couldn't remove the feeling of fleece being moved by someone else's hand. I had all the time in the world to enjoy myself, the funds to do so to a reasonable amount, but no world to do it in and no motivation to do it anyway. I remember letting myself make one silly purchase with that money, a Switch Lite and Animal Crossing. It was such an obvious attempt to distract myself from this feature I hated that I cried in the parking lot beforehand. I bought it anyway. It didn't make me feel better. Cat and Sprocket couldn't fill the void. So that quit lasted only 2 months. January 11th, 2021, I came back. I had to. I'd witnessed that there was no substitute or distraction, at least none that compared to that possibility I'd witnessed so long ago. I would come home on every weekday but Friday and put in 3 to 4 hours, and usually some 8s on Saturday and Sunday mornings and afternoons too, in order to maintain a once every other week upload schedule. This arrangement shifted a lot, changing between times where I worked as an editor for other creators and for terrible companies that left me in a corner alone without proper information to work on goddamn combustion systems that could have got people killed, but one thing always remained the same. I was working on this. It actually reached an extreme during 2023 where I was uploading every week, a holdover from when I had more time working as an editor, but on the schedule of someone working full-time 45 minutes from home. I would wake up at 6, get to work at 7, get home at 4:15, work on videos until 7, spend an hour or so having dinner and a shower, and then work from whatever time was left until bed. Fridays I kept open after the 9 to 5, but Saturday and Sunday I put in full 8s. If you count travel, I was spending 80 hours of my week working. When you consider the 56 that we spent asleep, that left only 32 hours of free time each week. But you know what? For how insane that schedule was, this was the same exact time where I was going out every single Saturday and meeting strangers at a local arcade bar almost without fail as the most true self I'd ever been. Where I figured out the clothes I wanted to wear and more of who I was because I was doing this so much. It was the same time where I was adventuring and getting all of that B-roll of the city to use for those videos to further that expression and explore in different ways than just myself. It was the time where who I am finally arrived. I don't know, maybe it's the rosy filter of the past, and I don't want to glorify it too much. Hell, not even at all, really. Because of that time, that year or more where I was working that much, I have to be conscious every day of my life now not to slip back into a fervor of nothing but work, where I'd end up eating hurried together salads on the floor in my underwear at 11 p.m. on a weeknight because I forgot to eat, and then I'd only sleep 6 hours and do it all again. No one should have to work for 60% or more of their waking hours, and I surely didn't want to. But I had to because it was logical. I had so much less time, but so much more as myself. So much more that mattered. That wasn't how I was losing my time, that's how I was gaining it back. I had to because art is the communication of that self. I was tricking myself into truth through ignorance, saying Sayaka and Homuro, but meaning I and me. I thought I wanted a distraction, but really I wanted to express something I couldn't help. I wanted to love myself for 36 hours a week rather than hate myself for 72. Each day I work is another where I express that. I know nothing but one thing for certain, and it's that most of us do this not because we want to, but because we have to. Have to so bad that we can come up with every single reason why it might be desirable and then follow them to death. Because there's something deep in there desperately clawing its way out, something insatiable, something perfect and selfish, something horrible. The me that I could be, every me that I could be, driving that selfishness in their sheer multitude. Yes, it meant the time I actually had to be myself was more limited, but it meant I got to explore all these additional selves inside of myself, and that meant there was more of me. It was an expression of memories I'll never make and the ideas I could never have, things about myself understood only in an image of flowers dead in the sidewalk or a grayscale piece of architecture, a blood dripping into the sink of my favorite characters holding hands, a mangled mess which is beyond the logic required for words, exactly because it doesn't make sense across 80 years layers of thinking and words and logic, but only in this mangled mess which comes out of the mind, because it is beyond what a single life can do. It is so many cells that it does not make sense. It's disturbed stories and love songs, overly careful photographs and pedantic reviews, club dance moves and vomit on the street corner afterwards. It comes out in awareness claiming to be ignorance. It comes out in the ability to normalize anything for expression's sake, even treating yourself as gears and cogs. It comes out. That's it. It has to, because without it, there is no us. So there's Fujino, in a world where she's coping with the death of her ideal artist, the thing which brought her to this peak undeniably dead. It's a sadness that she'll carry forward forever. But exactly in carrying forward that sadness, we find the hope which makes it not just possible, but required. During all of that crying outside Kyomoto's room, we get a flashback which follows from her being asked, "Why do you draw?" after the time where she said she'd rather read manga instead. It's a moment which is full of their time together. All their hours, days, weeks, and months they spent making manga. Time when the hopes and dreams were alive and well, where a drawn-on mustache in the mirror was everything and a home-cooked meal interrupted the art, ending on Kyomoto's most genuine smile. And cheesily enough, that's the reason. That in one smile you can inspire so many others and yourself at the same time. Fujino makes a mistake when she imagines that ideal world, and it's that yes, she made Kyomoto come out of a room which put her in harm's way, but she had never done that, then Kyomoto would have never had this ideal life. As she even yelled at her once, alone she isn't the kind of person who would have been able to make it to the library to be inspired by those books, and to make it to college and give it her best try. If that manga never slips under the door, then that last panel probably comes true. What this means is that yes, the pure artist is now dead, but it only ever got to be expressed in any way at all to the outside world exactly because that unideal self came by and mocked it for a moment, took it along for a wild ride where it got to play a part, even if only ever as the background. If it had been a truly perfect expression, then it would have never seen the light at all. And it doesn't need to be perfect anyway, because we see how Fujino and Kyomoto inspire each other, the ideal and the unideal feeding off one another. If someone who makes the most detailed images you could ever imagine is being driven forward by some stick figures, then what logic is there to say that something has to be perfect to mean something? How many other kids got to have their moment of inspiration because Fujino put out a whole host of unideal works, rather than spending her entire life crafting one perfected one that no one would ever see? The perfection in her did what it was meant to do. Be an impossible thing to chase which forces you to try anyway, and you never achieve it. Because that self never actually dies. When Fujino steps into that room, it is empty in spite of her imagination's fancy. But what she does find is a complete collection of her manga and a form used to vote for it every single time it came out. That is, no matter how distant and different their paths got, Kyomoto never stopped being inspired by Fujino. And that even if the person is gone, all those things they loved, all the things that helped them be who they were, are all still there. No matter how much further that rift grew, this never changed. No matter how much she doubted herself, that silent coat is still hanging right there. The part which was satisfied in the craft alone was her biggest fan. The ideal artist was grateful that they simply ever got to leave that room and be expressed as a part of something to begin with. That ideal self still exists every single day she draws something because it got her there to begin with. It's carried forward in that smile and the memories which created it, the moments which inspired the works she'll create from them, the imagined futures long dead that can be put to the page, a character smile, punch, or words alike standing in for ones deep inside of her that never got to be real, but do get to be the art someone else might make real. Yes, that ideal artist is dead, but its memory is in her and in the mind of every single person that her work touches now. And that's why we create. Because deep down inside of you, there is this shut-in beast, a monster that would starve and exhaust you, forcing you to live on nothing but the satisfaction of creating something alone. It would kill you in order to make something perfect. It would take up every single second of your life in isolation on something which no one will ever see, which has no purpose other than satisfying itself. In that way, it is selfish in its purity. And you, unideal and imperfect, do temper it by being less selfless, by wanting to spread and share and produce. You let it out in hints and glimpses, come home to it and take its image with you elsewhere so it sees the light without consuming it. You can't get it out. It's hungry, and without being fed with its craft, it will eat you and everything else you love instead. And so this is the only solution. You live in constant struggle with it instead. With that in mind, you know it makes no sense. It is illogical and stupid. You probably can't explain it. But even if you could, what would that change? Kyomoto knows why she draws and Fujino doesn't, but they ended up in the same place because knowing you draw from being alone and neglected doesn't change that you still want to do it either way. That ideal self will make you feel like crap when it shines through and shows that purity compared to everything else, the peaks of your success compared to the trudgery of all the times where it feels you're not up to that standard. You'll see it further and further away from yourself and feel failure and failure again and again. It drives you forward, but you hate it because of everything it means you could have been. But it's still your biggest fan. It's in everything you do still, and it's the reason you're there to begin with. So, no, you aren't perfect. But you're here because deep inside you some little bit is. And no matter how much you doubt that you're selfish and stupid and seeking attention and made the wrong decisions and could be doing so much more, well, you're only here because deep down that's not what you wanted. So you feel the monster die, and then you keep moving forward exactly so that it's never forgotten. And that's the paradox of creation if we want to keep being silly about it. That with eyes forward, you look back.